It's my job to formally welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is in fact the first webinar of what I'm going to say is the fall season, although it feels premature to be saying that in August, although today is cold, at least in Kingston. We are going to be resuming our every other week webinars starting this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and I hope that you guys will be able to join us for this new season of webinars. So today, we're very pleased to welcome back Dane Jensen for today's session called Coaching in 2020, the Playbook of Exceptional Leaders. This webinar is presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. My name is Meredith Dalt, and I'm a business journalist here at Smith School of Business. Well, here I'm in my home, as the rest of you are, but I do work at Smith School of Business, and it's a great pleasure to host these webinars. I want to remind you of a couple of things before we get going. The first is that this webinar will be recorded. You'll be getting a recording of the webinar in your email within the next couple of days. I believe you'll have access to it for a couple of weeks. Is that true, Dane? Since you're here, so.
Yep. Yeah, for 14 days.
So anyone who registered for the webinar will be getting the recording by email. You'll have 2 weeks to review it. Also, if you want to ask a question, and I hope that you will, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will be doing questions at the end of today's session, and Dane knows so much stuff that you do not want to miss the opportunity to be able to ask him things. So do that. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dane Jensen, who many of you will know. He's the CEO of Third Factor, and he's no stranger to these webinars. Back in the spring, he presented on the subject of resilience, which was a popular session. He's an expert on strategy, leadership, and resilience under pressure, and oversees Third Factor's delivery of leadership development programs to leading firms across North America. He teaches in the full-time and executive MBA programs at Smith School of Business at Queen's University, and is an affiliate faculty member with UNC Executive Education at the Keenan-Flagler Business School. Did I say that correctly?
You did. Nailed it.
Keenan-Flagler Business School. In addition to his corporate work, Dane works extensively with athletes, coaches, leaders, and boards across Canada's Olympic and Paralympic sports system to enhance national competitiveness. He's worked as an advisor to senior executives in 23 countries on 6 continents. That's not nothing. His first book, tentatively entitled The Power of Pressure, will be published by HarperCollins in early 2021. Congratulations on that, Dane. And thank you for being here. I'm going to turn myself off and turn the camera and the floor over to you, and I'll pop on at the end for questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Meredith. And thanks so much to everybody for joining today. I know how crazy it is for all of us, so thank you for an hour of your time. I'm actually really excited to talk about this today because, you know, the whole topic of coaching is something that our organization, Third Factor, and in partnership with Smith, has really been focused on for over 25 years. But we hit a big milestone last week. You know, we set a challenge for ourselves about 2 years ago to really think through from the ground up, how has coaching changed? How has it evolved? And how can we refresh our perspectives on coaching for the 2020s. And that resulted in, I think, some interesting new thinking and insights that really draw on the 30 years of work that we've done with coaches in sport, business, academia, and government. And so this is kind of my first time out to really share a lot of what we have been working on over the past couple of years with you folks. So I'm excited to get into it and talk about, hey, what's changed when it comes to coaching, but what hasn't changed when it comes to coaching. There are some pretty fundamental things that are still the same in 2020 as they were in 2000 or 1990. And I'm going to start actually with a pretty fundamental question. And that question is, at the end of the day, what are we coaching for? Right? Because of course, we always want to start with the end in mind. One of the big tenets of coaching is expectations need to be clear if we're going to expect people to adjust their performance. And when we think about coaching, when we think of the exceptional coaches, they tend to focus really on 2 things. They have a bit of a double bottom line. And of course, the first thing that we have to deliver as coaches is results, right? We have jobs. Results are why we get paid. Results are why athletic coaches get hired back. We have to deliver results. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of different ways to deliver results, right? We can use bonuses to get people to results. We can use hierarchy to get people to results. We can use fear. We can use intimidation, right? There's a lot of different ways to drive results. The challenge with most of those approaches to driving results is that results is really our lagging indicator, right? Results tell us how did we do last week, last month, last quarter. They don't tell us anything about where performance is going to come from for the next 3 months, the next year. And when we use bonuses, when we use hierarchy, right, when we use urgency and fear and intimidation, they tend to have a pretty short half-life. And so the real leading indicator that coaches are looking for is commitment, right? How committed and engaged are my people getting in service of delivering results? Because commitment tells us, what am I likely to get going forward? And so when we think about the double bottom line of coaching, for us, it's really about how do I deliver results in a way that builds, that strengthens the engagement and commitment of folks around me. And I want to say a couple words about commitment, because when I talk about commitment, and I think this is even more important than 2020 than ever, we are not talking necessarily about commitment to an organization. Right? It's like, when I die, bury me under Goods Hall, right? This is not what we're talking about when it comes to commitment in 2020. But what I mean when I say commitment is a pretty specific concept that I think was really well expressed by the work of Cynthia Scott, who is an OD consultant, who really looked at what is it that separates the most productive from the least productive people in organizations. And what she found was that the most productive people were what she called committed, right? And this was about commitment to devoting my extra effort, commitment to doing my best work because that's who I am as a person. Now you'll see under commitment, we have conforming. In conforming, this is, hey, I show up, I perform my role, I do my job the way it's supposed to be done, I meet my job description, and I go home. We're going to talk today not about coaching for conformity, because that's actually a pretty boring thing to talk about. There are lots of easier ways to help people around you conform. That is the role of carrots and sticks and standard operating procedures and incentives. But there's kind of a funny thing that happens between conforming and commitment, right? At the end of the day, who decides whether Meredith gets committed to something? Meredith, right? There is no switch that I can reach into and turn on in Meredith's head that's going to trigger her commitment. And so if we're going to move beyond conformity and get people to commit, really what we have to think through is, how do we manage the environment, the physical and psychological environment, in such a way that people are likely to get committed? And in many ways, the reason that photo is up there of the garden is we can kind of think of ourselves like gardeners in this respect, right? When we think about the really exceptional gardeners, I had the privilege of living next door to an old Greek couple for 10 years. I was living in Greektown in Toronto. And I can tell you, we bought our plants at the same stores. Our gardens looked pretty similar in May. By August, there was no comparison. Most of my plants had died. You know, you went over there, it was like walking into a fairy tale. Like, there were blooms everywhere. Everything was growing tall, right? They weren't reaching into the ground and ripping the plants out. They knew how to manage the environment. They knew how to space the plants appropriately. They knew how to water them, appropriately, how to give them the right balance of sun and shade. Every summer, they would get a trailer full of sheep manure delivered, which was great for the street from an odor standpoint, and they would till it into the earth, right? They knew how to manage the environment. And so as coaches, our job is to manage the physical and psychological environment. Now in 2020, this has become a little more challenging, right? It's hard to manage the environment through Zoom. Many things in the environment are more outside of our control when we move to a remote first operation or workforce. And so what this means is that the number one thing that has to be in the environment is a relationship. Great coaches are disciplined. They take discipline to building relationships with their people, because the relationship is like the pipeline through which coaching flows. Right? I'm sure most of us on this call have had the opportunity to get some free coaching from somebody we didn't get a relationship with, we didn't have a relationship with. How did that go? Right? It's like, thanks for the free advice. Really appreciate that. And so when we are talking about coaching in 2020, it has to start with, am I taking a disciplined approach to building relationships, even in the face of distance and remote work? And one of my favorite stories about a coaching relationship comes from Christine Sinclair. And I'm sure everybody on the call knows Christine Sinclair. She's the all-time leader in scoring in international play in women's soccer. She's the captain of Canada's women's soccer team and a two-time Olympic medalist. And I had a chance to sit down with Christine and talk to her about coaching. And I just asked her about a memorable coaching experience she's had. And here's how she answered that question. I think it's a really interesting story.
I think the story that sticks out for me is when I was being recruited to go to university down in the States, and I had narrowed it down to a handful of schools, and then the head coach of the University of Portland came up and visited Clive Charles was his name. And I remember all the other coaches, they came up and they're like, you're going to do this for our soccer team. You're going to start, you're going to do, and just sort of like laid out my soccer path for me. And Clive came up. First of all, he took my parents to dinner, and then I remember sitting in my living room, and we didn't talk about soccer at all. He was, what do you want to do after soccer? Because for most athletes, most NCAA athletes, that's where your career ends. What type of education I wanted to get, what major did I want? Am I social? Am I outgoing? What type of school is ideal for me? We didn't talk about soccer once. And yeah, it was in that moment that, I decided I'm going to your school because he cared about me more than just like an asset to him for 4 years to play on his soccer team and win some soccer games. He cared about me as a person. And in that instant, my decision was made.
So I think this is a really interesting video. And what I think is most interesting about it is Christine Sinclair wants to win, right? This is a highly competitive person. You do not become the all-time scoring leader by being somebody who's all touchy-feely and all about the relationship. And yet, right, what was the thing she wanted to see in a coach? She wanted somebody who cared about her as a person, right? We talk about this mindset of exceptional coaches as a developmental bias. And this is one of the big changes we made in 2020, is this went right at the heart of our model for coaching, right? Great coaches build relationships. They take the discipline to build relationships that are rooted in a bias towards developing the other person. That is, the coach sees what's possible for that person, and they align themselves. They feed the part of that other person that wants to get better, that wants to grow. They strengthen it, they empower it. In every interaction they have, they're thinking about, how can I help this other person grow and develop? And when we approach our job, when we approach the role of leading, of coaching with a developmental bias, it is what underpins our success with everything else, right? When people believe we want them to get better, they are much more receptive to feedback. They are much more likely to be open when we ask them questions. The developmental bias is at the heart of great coaching. And this gets at the heart of another key point, which is, for us, coaching is not really a to-do. It's not like a feedback template. It's not like, okay, I did my 5 minutes of coaching with Yasmin, back to managing. No, it's a way of looking at people. And then on top of this developmental bias, what we observed when we went back to our, quote unquote R&D lab, was that exceptional coaches, as idiosyncratic and different as they are, tend to all consistently execute 3 plays using 4 skills. And so the 3 plays that exceptional coaches really focus on are clarity, competence, recognition. The 4 skills, how they execute those plays, are questions, listening, feedback, and confronting. And so over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, I'm not going to get to all 3 plays and all 4 skills, but I've picked out a couple that are particularly vital when it comes to honing our role as coaches in 2020. And so we are really going to start with clarity, the first play of a coach. Legendary athletics coach Andy Higgins once said that expectation is the basis of all successful coaching. And if you talk to Andy about what he means by that, he'll tell you 2 things. First, athletes can't possibly adjust their behavior and their training if they don't have a clear picture of what high performance looks like. Right? A clear and compelling picture of what we're trying to accomplish, of what good looks like, is what allows people to be self-directed. But second, he would say it's the role of the coach to put an expectation out there that's just a little beyond what the performer thinks is possible. Very often in work, in life, when we give somebody something to do and they bring it back and it's not done the way that we wanted it, we immediately jump to competence, the second play of a coach. We go, they don't have the skill, they don't have the knowledge. When in fact, if we diagnose it, what we will discover is that they just left the conversation with us with a different picture in their head of what they were supposed to do than the picture that we were holding in our head. And so great coaches focus on clarity with tremendous discipline. And this is one of those places where actually our work in sport and business paints quite a clear divide. I'll give you an example from my personal experience. My wife and I moved to London, England for a couple of years, about a decade ago, right before we started having kids. We thought, let's go see the world. And when I moved to London, one of the things I left in Toronto was my golf clubs. I thought, you know what, we're going to live in the middle of the city. We weren't taking a car. I'm probably not going to get out to play. So, you know, I left those in storage. And of course, when I came back, I wanted to get back into it. And so I, you know, dusted the clubs off and I thought, why don't I get some lessons, right? Let's actually seek professional help to see if it can improve some things. And of course, in the first lesson, when I get out on the range with the golf pro, what's the first thing they say, right? Hit a few balls. Let's see what I'm working with here. So I hit the first couple of balls. Now, how effective is it going to be if I turn around and the pro goes, well, I mean, I see the issue. You know, you got to hit it farther. Like add another 10 yards. Like, come on, let's go. All right. So I go back and I start hitting a few more balls. Like, well, I mean, those were farther, but, you know, straighten it out. You're slicing it off to the right. I'm going to turn around and wrap my golf club around this guy. Why? Because that's not what we do in sport, right? He's going to come right over. He's going to fix my grip. He's going to say, straighten your leg at impact. Make sure on the takeaway, you're transferring weight back and then forward. Keep your head down, right? He's going to focus on clarity around the behaviors, not the outcomes. And we do things like, let's hit it further in business all the time. We need to be more productive. We need to get more customer centric. We need to be more agile, right? All of these things. We need to be more professional. We need to behave by like one team. We need to execute on our new standard of care. We need to become their trusted advisor, right? All of these are exactly the same as we need to hit it farther and we need to straighten it out. And so what this says to me is when we're thinking about providing clarity as a coach, we've got to think about, well, what do people need clarity on? And yes, of course, people need clarity on the vision, right? That's the big picture, right? If I'm going to do a puzzle, what's the one thing I need to see? I need to see the box lid, right? It's got to be put somewhere where I have a visual so I know where my piece goes and what I'm building towards. I got to understand the values, how we're going to treat each other around here. But what I really need to know is what are the steps? What are the performance goals? These are what are the behaviors that I ultimately need to be doing to add up to moving towards our end goal, towards our vision. You know, you take it back to sport. In sport, coaches spend a lot of time building a resonant vision for an athlete of what it's going to feel like to stand on the podium, what they're working towards, why, you know, all that kind of good stuff. But they're not sitting in the gym every day going like podium, 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 right? They are relentlessly focused on what are the reps that we need to get into today? What's the work that we need to do that is going to start us up that staircase towards that end goal? And so as coaches and as leaders, so often the things we diagnose as competence issues can be traced back to, have I been really clear? Am I holding the same picture in my head as the person that I'm coaching around what constitutes our performance goals? What good looks like from a behavior standpoint? Now, of course, in 2020, and this is another big change we made, in addition to performance goals, values, and vision, there is a really strong additional element of clarity, which is, why does this matter? Right? At the end of the day, what we are seeing when it comes to coaching is, yes, coaching, of course, is about achievement. It is about helping people unlock their potential and grow and get promoted and mentoring them to success and all of that good stuff, which has always been important. And achievement without meaning is hollow, right? In life, we are constantly balancing this trajectory of, I got to pay the mortgage, you know, I got to get the car payment, I got to put my kids through school, and I want to be looking up every once in a while and going, what is this all in service of? And so when it comes to providing clarity in 2020, a big part of a coach's job is really connecting the dots from what we're focused on a day-to-day basis up to, why does this really matter? And this can feel a little bit abstract. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about is, how do we make meaning something that is a little bit more practical? And really from a coaching standpoint, it's my belief that we can help to connect the dots to meaning in one of three ways, right? There are three things that tend to imbue achievement with a sense of meaning. One is personal growth, right? How is this strengthening me? How is this contributing to my progress in a meaningful way? The second, of course, and this is the one that we tend to go to most directly, is contribution. Right? How is what we are doing contributing to the organization, to the team, to society, to those less fortunate than us? And then the third way that we connect the dots to meaning is through connection. Right? How is what we are doing building a sense of connection? And that could be within the team, that could be across the organization, or that could be more broadly in society. And so our first play as a coach, and the place where often we fall down, is, have I sufficiently built clarity around what we're trying to accomplish, what we need to do, each of us, to contribute to that accomplishment, and critically, why does it matter, right? Why is it important that we move towards that vision that we've laid out? Now, the dominant skill that we use as we are working to build clarity is the skill of asking effective questions, right? My ability to ask effective questions has never been more vital than it is in 2020. I want to talk for a second about vending machines. Okay, quite a pivot, from questions to vending machines. Why vending machines? Well, there's this famous interview question that was asked at Apple, or at least supposedly asked at Apple, of incoming software engineers. And it was a deceptively simple question. It went as follows. You walk up to a vending machine, you put your money in the slot, and when you push the button, nothing comes out. How do you figure out what's wrong? And of course, the purpose of this question was really to test this prospective engineer's ability to generate hypotheses and then come up with creative ways to test those hypotheses, right? Okay, is there an issue with the money getting down into the bank? Is it an issue with the connection between, the money receptacle and then that says, okay, yes, you can dispense something? Is it a mechanical issue with the springs? Like, how would we test this? And you see, when we are coaching in 2020, for most of us, it's like we are standing outside of that vending machine, right? We are now coaching remotely. We're outside of the machine. We're putting the money in. We're giving people what we think are clear directions. We're outlining what we want to see accomplished. And then sometimes when we push the button, nothing comes out, right? Or instead of a Twix bar, we get a pack of Halls. And see, the answer is not to continue to hit the button harder and harder. The answer is to figure out, how do I diagnose what the block is? And because, when we replace vending machines with people, there is only one way to get the information that we need, and that's by asking questions. That's our only diagnostic tool, right? The information I need is inside that other person, and I need to get really good at asking effective questions in order to get it out. And effective questions are things like, where could we simplify this process? What obstacles might you face, right? What do you think the impact of this will be? What do you think needs to happen? If I asked you any of these questions, what would happen? It would get you thinking, right? And that's what we want to have happen, because the intent of really good questions is to build self-responsibility and self-awareness. Questions that get people thinking lead them to come up with their own ideas. And as much as we wish it weren't so, people tend to be much more committed to their own ideas than our ideas. When I ask questions like this, questions that force people to think, it is the best possible way to focus attention. Nothing focuses attention like a question. Now, questions only really work from a coaching standpoint if they are asked with a developmental bias, right? There are lots of reasons that people ask questions. So intent is really important. When I am in a court of law, if I am a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness, what is my intent in asking questions? It's to prove out a storyline, right? It's to put holes in somebody's credibility. Does a lawyer ever ask a question in open court that they don't already know the answer to? No, right? They are trying to prove out a storyline. So when we cross-examine, when we ask questions in service of proving out a storyline, they do not elicit reflection. They do not build self-awareness and self-responsibility. As a coach, we ask questions that we are genuinely curious about. Questions that we think will help us better understand the situation or help the performer get clearer on what their block might be. And people recognize this, right? When we are coming from a place of developmental bias versus cross-examination. And the other thing I would say is, this is one of the traps that people fall into sometimes, and we even see this in our programs, right? They come off of a coaching program and they go to give somebody quick, clear direction and they go, wait a minute, I was taught I'm supposed to ask more questions. And so then you come up with a question like, do you think it would be a good idea if we phoned the client this afternoon? It's like, that's a statement. That's not a question. So it's not all questions in coaching. We ask the questions that we are genuinely curious about, rooted in a developmental bias. And then, of course, once we've asked questions, we have to actively listen. And this is because people rarely blurt out to their manager or coach what the real issue is, right? Our job as a coach is to get people talking, to keep them talking. We got to think about it like we're peeling an onion a little bit, right? We got to wait for the layers to kind of fall away. That's where the truth is going to start to emerge. That's when we're going to get to the core issue. And active listening is a tremendously powerful way to communicate respect and caring. It is very beneficial for the relationship. Now, I think many of us have been told since kindergarten that we're not particularly good listeners, myself included. And we start to go, okay, this is like a genetic gift. You either have it or you don't. That's not the case. Listening at the end of the day is about behaviors. And they're behaviors that most of us kind of know intuitively. And so what I actually want you to do is I want you to call to mind somebody that you know who is an exceptional listener, right? Call to mind that person, have a specific person in mind. And then we're going to go back to the polls here. Let me just pull it up. And what I want you to picture in your mind is when you hold that person front and center, what do they do? What are the behaviors that let you know that they are such a good listener? So just take a second, reflect on that, and just pop a couple into the Menti poll here. And if you weren't here when we set up the polling earlier, you just follow the instructions at the top of the screen. You're going to grab an internet connected device, go to menti.com, throw in that 7-digit code, and then just have a think and put in something that comes to mind around listening. I'm just going to take a look at some of the results here. All right, so a lot of common themes, right? Eye contact. Yeah, we want to make sure that we have our full attention. And I saw another one around no interruptions. So good listeners prepare the environment. They close the door so that they can be undistractable, or at least mostly undistractable, and they maintain eye contact and physical presence. What else do? They wait and pause. They don't interrupt. They come in with relevant follow-up questions. They repeat what I've said in a slightly different way. We call that paraphrasing, right? They engage in active listening. They echo. They're authentic. They demonstrate that through the way in which they volunteer information, right? They put their story on the table as well. Body language is important, reflecting back, asking more focused questions, validating, right? You guys have got it, right? We know good listening when we see it. And this is the thing that I want to reinforce. If you have thought your entire life you're not a good listener, I have news for you. If you make eye contact with people, grunt every once in a while and say, I got it. Ask a couple probing questions, repeat back what you think you've heard, and then summarize at the end, you are a good listener, right? It's not this mystical, magical quality that some of us are endowed with and others aren't. And so I want to highlight just a couple of things that came up in that list just now, because there are a couple of listening skills that I think are particularly relevant in 2020. And the reason they're so relevant in 2020 is because we are faced with a unique challenge when we have to ask questions and listen in a remote environment, right? We all know the research that tells us that only a small amount of the overall communication comes through our words. The rest is through tone and body language. And unfortunately, the reality is, if you're coaching over the phone, which many of us are, or even a video call, you don't have access to a lot of this information. And that means that it's much easier to misconstrue, right? To fail to read between the lines and go with the words only. And so this makes it more important than ever to engage in a couple of key listening behaviors when we are coaching, right? The first is sounds as if. And this is, of course, the key skill of paraphrasing. And I want to differentiate between paraphrasing and parroting, right? When I give people, somebody a difficult piece of feedback and they come back and they go, well, I totally disagree with that, right? I don't go, so you're saying you disagree with me, right? That's parroting. That's just repeating back the exact words that somebody has said. Paraphrasing means I summarize both the words and the message that I heard underneath. So let's say I'm coaching somebody and they go, well, I guess that's that then. Right? I don't repeat that back. I paraphrase and say, sounds as if you think there's more to the story, right? That's an effective paraphrase. The second key skill that we really want to cultivate is it seems like you're feeling X about this issue. This is reflecting feelings. And this gives us a really good opportunity to check our interpretation, that we are interpreting the tone, the nonverbals, all that stuff correctly, right? So when the other person says, oh, perfect, I'll just put my other projects on hold and work on this tonight. Right? You might come back and say, it seems like you're feeling frustrated about this request. And as soon as we label the emotion, the other person will either agree or correct us. I'm not frustrated, I'm just really busy. This is the opportunity that we need to go a little bit deeper. This is our chance to check our perceptions to make sure we're hearing the whole story before we move the conversation forward. And so questions and listening are a vital paired set of skills. Now, let's talk about the second play of a coach. And this is all about competence, because of course, once people have built clear expectations, right? We're clear on what constitutes high performance. Of course, what allows people to move towards those expectations is competence, that they have the knowledge, the skill, and the confidence to do it. And at the end of the day, adults really don't get committed to things that they don't feel good at, or at least that they could become good at, right? If I give somebody 3 things to do, what's the thing they're going to do first? The one they feel most confident in. What's the thing they're going to leave till the end or try to delegate or get out of? The stuff they don't feel particularly good at. And so as a coach, we've got to make sure that we are paying attention to building the knowledge, skill, and confidence of people. And again, this is a place where our vantage point across sport and business is kind of interesting, because the way competence gets built in elite sport is very different than business. And I'll give you an example. There's a sports scientist based in the West Coast in Canada named Trent Stellingworth. And one of the pieces of research that Trent did is he looked at how rowers, Olympic level rowers, spend their time. And he timed or logged the time of a group of Olympic level rowers for a full year, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. He had them log how they were spending their time. And the result of that painstaking year-long research project was a graph that looked like this. Now, I don't know about you. If I was Trent, I might have been a bit disappointed that a year of my life led to a pie chart with only two segments to it. But here is how these elite athletes spent their time. The green segment, that's about 15%. That's time spent training, about 4 hours a day, give or take, over a 360-day year. The rest of the pie, the blue section, this was recovery, and that includes sleep, of course. Now, you might look at this chart and you might notice, hey, something is missing here, right? We filled up the whole 100%. And what's missing is, what are they doing all this training for? Competition. Because time spent competing actually comprises about 0.005%, or 20 to 5 to 30 minutes a year across 4 to 6 races. And in fact, the Olympic Games, which is the point of all of this training and recovering, represents about 0.00002% of an athlete's time over a 4-year quadrennium. You see, this is not the way it works in business, right? We do not spend 15% of our time in a safe training environment with a coach that is designing drills for us, right? Where we get our reps in. It's an environment designed to build up our competence one step at a time before we go into competition. In business, we are in competition all day, every day. There is no training camp that we can send folks on where they're going to magically get their competence built up and then get shipped back to us with all the skills and tools that we need for them to execute on their role. And so as coaches in 2020, we've got to recognize that the organization, the formal learning function, is probably not going to take care of competence development. We got to do it. And the number one thing we need to know to do that effectively is the skill of progression. In many organizations, what we find are managers and leaders who have consistent focus on end goals, right? What's our sales target for this year, right? What are we trying to achieve from an NPS standpoint for the next 6 months? And here's the thing, when we focus consistently on those end goals, if they are overwhelming to people, they can be profoundly demotivating. It's like strapping a piano to somebody's back and saying like, okay, I need you to get committed to carrying this around, right? This is not the way that great coaches work. Coaches, of course, know the end goal, they know the current performance, but they maintain their focus relentlessly on what is the next step. They are all about progression. And that is because what we understand as coaches is that commitment is built in the successful completion of small steps. Not only that, confidence is built in the successful completion of small steps. And so the way that we build this staircase as a coach is we build knowledge and skill and we reinforce for confidence. We build knowledge and skill and we reinforce for confidence. We build knowledge and skill and we reinforce for confidence, right? That is the stairway to heaven from a coaching standpoint. And what the performer wants to know is that you as the coach know what an effective reach is for their next step. Right? Coaches are really good at not putting people in positions where they're going to suffer devastating failures. That's a way to destroy trust, is if you try to get people to take too big of a leap. But we need to be pushing people as they head into that staircase. One of the main tools that we have at our disposal to build competence, to help people move up learning curves, is giving them competent, relevant feedback. In fact, one of my bugaboos about coaching right now is that coaching kind of in many quarters has been cordoned off entirely as the discipline of asking questions. Again, if you follow a great basketball coach around a practice, yes, they're asking questions, but it's not all questions, right? It's not like, well, how do you think that free throw was? And how do you think we ran the defense, right? There's a lot of feedback. You move your elbow up 4 inches, right? I need less separation when you get back. And so giving competent, relevant feedback shouldn't be a one-off event or a rare event. It really is the lifeblood of the coaching relationship in many ways. And so let's talk about what feedback is. Well, Merriam-Webster's defines feedback as a rumbling, whining, or whistling sound. Okay, this might be the wrong definition of feedback. It does sometimes feel like rumbling or whining, but that's not really what we're talking about here, right? Our definition of feedback really has 3 parts. It's about giving someone information about a performance that you've observed in service of helping them improve. And there are 3 important parts to this. First, feedback is about feeding back information, not my interpretations, not my judgments, not my evaluations. It's giving somebody information about their performance. Second, that I have observed, right? It's very rarely effective when I give people feedback based on third-party info, right? It's like, hey, I heard you were really rude in that meeting this morning. Where does that discussion go? It's like, who said that, right? Who told you that? And so we need to be able to observe performance to give feedback on it. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then finally, feedback is in service of improvement, right? I'm not giving feedback to show somebody I'm smarter than them or to bring them face to face with how they failed, right? Or to reinforce hierarchy. Feedback is about helping people move up learning curves. But let's talk about one of the big challenges with feedback in 2020. It's the middle part of the definition, right? You can't coach what you don't see. In order to give effective feedback, we've got to be able to observe enough performances that we can provide feedback based on direct firsthand information. One of the things that has really impressed me over the pandemic is how one of the coaching teams we work with in sport has adapted to not being physically co-located with their athletes. And that's the figure skating team of Brian Orser and Tracy Wilson, both of whom are Olympic medalists in their own right. But they also run now the Cricket Club in Toronto, which is the most successful skating club in the world. The Russian women's champion trains out of there. The Japanese men's champion, who's also the reigning Olympic gold medalist, trains out of there, as well as a number of other skaters scattered across the globe. Now, of course, when COVID hit and the walls went up, the athletes couldn't come to Toronto to train. So what do you think Brian and Tracy did? Did they get on the phone and say, well, how do you think that practice went, right? Or did they try to give information based on third party? Hey, I heard from your dad that, you missed your quad this morning. What do you think that's about? No, what they asked the athletes to do is they said, hey, tape your cell phone onto the glass on the boards with the camera pointed out at the ice. And then I want you to run your practice wearing an AirPod in your ear. So I will be able to see your performance and give you feedback directly into your ear based on what I am witnessing firsthand. Now, we don't all have the benefit of being able to do exactly that, to tape our cell phone to the boards of performance, so to speak, but we need to be thinking very carefully as coaches and as leaders, how can I put myself in enough positions to observe performance where I can give firsthand feedback, right? More joint coaching calls. More invitations to the people you manage to come and present at meetings they might not normally be part of, right? More opportunities to work alongside them on projects. Now is the time to get really creative around how am I putting myself in a position to coach. Now, once we've got the data, we got to give the feedback. And this is a place where we can sometimes sabotage ourselves right off the bat, right? How many people have been asked this question, right? Would you like some feedback? Hey, you want some feedback? Right? Where do you immediately go when you hear that question? Like, oh God, what have I done? Right? Especially if you have an active self-critic, you start to get anxious. You think about over the last couple of days, okay, what's happened that this person might want to give me feedback on? Right? We want people not in a place of anxiety and defensiveness when we give feedback. We want people in a place of reflection. And so we want to make sure we're not sabotaging ourselves right out of the gate. And so instead of, would you like some feedback? Consider something along these lines, right? When would be a good time to share my thoughts with you on X? Do you have 10 minutes to talk about X? I have some feedback on X. When is a good time to talk? What do all of these things have in common? They have the X factor, right? They got the headline in there. That's what people want. People want to know, what are we going to be talking about, right? I have some feedback on the report you submitted. When would be a good time? I want to share some feedback on how we could improve the effectiveness of our meeting. When's good for you? right? This type of opening is what is known as a micro yes, right? We give the person control. They know what we're going to give them feedback on. They say yes to it, and they decide when they want to receive it, right? It puts people in a place where they are much more likely to be open and receptive as opposed to defensive and justifying. Now, we're into the feedback itself. We got to put our feedback together. This is a place where we can inadvertently fall into some traps just by following some of the conventional wisdom about feedback. And so I actually want to leverage your expertise here when it comes to feedback. So I'm going to put up on screen here a pretty common set of things that we hear around feedback from time to time. Using Menti, I want you to spend as many dots. You can vote for as many as you want. What do you think are some of the principles that we should hold to when we are giving feedback? What are ones that make sense to you or that you think would help you be effective in your feedback? So just take a second, reflect, and then we'll see where the clusters land. Look at those dots fighting for position. Looks like a beehive in there. All right. So as the dots continue to fly in, let's take a look at where we've got the most heat and light. So a couple of very big clusters around deliver it as soon as possible, focus on behavior, and link behaviors to impact. And you are bang on, right? Feedback is most effective when it's timely. Very soon after a performance, people's opinion or memory of the performance begins to diverge. However, there are a couple of times when timeliness can actually become a block, right? When emotions are heated, people literally cannot hear feedback. We need to give people time to calm down. In a remote world, trying to be overly timely can also backfire if I don't have the whole story. So I actually think, 2020 is an interesting place in terms of timeliness of feedback. Often because I'm trying to triangulate, I need to take the time to investigate a little bit and do some due diligence to make sure that I've got all the information before I go and deliver my feedback. I'm linking to impact, the number one cluster here, absolutely. This goes back to the start with why piece, right? It's one thing to talk about the behavior. It's another thing to say, hey, what was the impact? And here's the thing. You want to make the impact about the other person, right? Remember, coaching is about strengthening. It's about making people better. Right? So let's say you invite somebody who reports to you into a meeting and they lay out a bunch of problems with no solutions, right? The key is not to frame the impact as like, you made me look like a real idiot in there, right? That's the last time I bring you to a meeting, right? That's the impact on you. That's very self-serving, right? I want to be saying, hey, you missed an opportunity to demonstrate your thoughtful approach to problem solving in the meeting that we just had. That's the impact on them. That's what I'm focused on as a coach. Couple of other things that are in here, right? Lead with positive, end with positive. I want to hit these so hard, right? You do not need to lead or end with positive. In fact, one of the things that sabotages feedback is that people stick with the sandwich approach to feedback. Is everybody familiar with the sandwich approach to feedback, right? This is good, bad, good. Hey, that report looks terrific. The data is entirely incorrect, but you speak with such confidence they probably won't even notice, right? That's the sandwich feedback. The challenge with sandwich feedback is that it's confusing, right? And how it's confusing depends on the level of confidence or the self-critic that exists in the other person, right? If I deliver a piece of sandwich feedback to somebody with an active self-critic, what do? They go, oh, okay, right? I wanted to start the conversation off on a nice note. Then came that real piece of feedback. Then they kind of buttered me up on the way out of the door, right? They miss the reinforcing feedback, the actual positive feedback that has the power to impact behavior if it's delivered independently. On the other hand, if somebody has a healthy ego, they come out of that conversation going like, hey, 2 out of 3, that's not bad, right? There was that little thing in the middle, but probably not a big deal. And so we miss an opportunity as a coach. When we wait and sandwich feedback or bundle it up, we miss an opportunity to impact performance. And so again, I want you to have that image in mind of a basketball coach at a basketball practice, right? Reinforcing, hey, great close on defense. Correcting, hey, you want to get back a little bit faster. Reinforcing, all right, that was terrific. Way to keep your feet moving. Correcting, hey, keep your elbow up, make sure you're getting full extension, right? The corrections and the reinforcement are just coming in the flow of performance. They are completely normal. That's our goal when it comes to delivering feedback. And in service of doing that, and you guys already hit on most of these, We have our best likelihood of success when we're delivering feedback if we keep our feedback specific, right? So instead of, hey, this report's excellent, it's, I really appreciated the concise executive summary that gave me the key conclusions up front, right? When I say this report is excellent, it helps the person feel good, but it doesn't actually help them improve. It doesn't reinforce a behavior. They don't know what to do next time, right? Feedback needs to be descriptive, right? So instead of, hey, you're really not keeping up with the pace around here, it's your last update was 2 days after our agreed deadline. This means finance can't complete the projections on time and it affects all of us, right? It's focused on behavior instead of the person. You know, you want to create somebody, a reaction to feedback, label people, right? You're lazy in your meeting prep. Instead, we agreed the meeting lead would send out an agenda 2 days in advance. And then finally, the relationship piece is what I talked about earlier, right? Self-serving feedback is, you know, you really made me look bad in there. The relationship says it's all about the coachee, right? I am here for you. You missed an opportunity to demonstrate your approach to problem solving. Let's talk about how we can make you shine, right? That's feedback that maintains the relationship. And so that's at a very high level. I think some of the places where we have seen some really interesting, new or just tweaks to existing models for coaching. Unfortunately, in the span of 45 to 50 minutes, I can't go into depth on all 3 plays and all 4 skills, but let me just nod briefly to recognition and confronting, which are kind of, you know, 2 ends of the coaching spectrum, if you will. Recognition, this is really about once people have clarity around expectations, right? They know what high performance is and why it matters. I've helped them build the knowledge and skill to move towards those expectations. Do they feel like it's worth it, right? Are they willing to do it? Do they know that it's going to be recognized and appreciated and valued by the person whose opinion means a lot to them? That really completes the virtuous cycle of coaching, right? Clear expectations, build the knowledge and skill to get there, and then reinforce when people make the moves and behave in the way that is consistent with the clear picture. And then, of course, we have confronting. And the reason confronting is the 4th skill in the model is twofold. First, as a coach, of course, I don't start with confronting, right? I don't move immediately to confronting. As a coach, I want to start by using questions and listening, right? To build self-awareness and self-responsibility. If that doesn't work, I move to giving people feedback. And it's only when the questions haven't worked, the feedback has had no impact, then I need to confront, right? I go, you don't do it like this, you do it like that. The key, again, is mindset, right? People want to know that I'm confronting from a position of development. And in fact, it is profoundly uncoach-like to let people continue to perform in ways that are limiting them without confronting them. I am depriving them of information that could help them get better. And so good coaches don't shy away from confronting. They use it as necessary. And once you've mastered feedback, questions, and listening, you can actually put them together in a way that effectively helps you have a confronting conversation. We open with a piece of specific descriptive feedback, and then we drop our agenda and use questions to really explore the resistance that's coming from the other person. So we're going to move to Q&A in a minute, and I can see a couple of questions that have come in already, so I'll have a chance to answer some of the questions. If something has come up for you, now is the moment to type it into that Q&A box at the bottom, because I'll take the last 7 or 8 minutes to dig through the questions that have come in. While you are thinking of that, or if you don't have a question that you want to ask, I want to advise that if you want a kind of concise and even more in-depth view of what we talked about today, myself and our director of training, Peggy Baumgartner, just released a white paper called 3x4 Coaching that really goes through the 3 plays and 4 skills of a coach. I think it's a really concise and practical guide to a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. So while you're thinking about questions or just pausing while I kind of read the questions, if you want a copy of that white paper, you can just hold up your camera app to the screen and you should get a little notification shade down from the top, and that'll take you to the page where you can pop in your email. Or head to thirdfactor.com/Smith and you'll get the same opportunity to download the paper. So with that, Meredith, I'll turn it over to you. Would love to do some Q&A. Let's see what's come in.
Hi, Dane. That was fantastic. You can see the questions too, but for the ease of your thinking, I will read them to you. So The first one, what's the most effective way to give feedback? I'm wondering if it should be way. What's the most effective way to give feedback when it's not possible to actually observe the behavior? I also was thinking that.
Yeah, so this is a great question. Thanks, Jeff. I mean, it's not always possible to, engage in the proverbial taping of the cell phone to the boards, right? We don't necessarily have a chance to observe as many performances as we would like. This is where we really want to leverage our question skills, right? Make it a regular discipline of asking performance-oriented questions, right? So what's been challenging for you this week? Where are you feeling stuck? What's been frustrating for you? And when they answer, they might say something like, I'm just not moving as fast as I want with this particular client. The key at that moment is to resist the temptation to jump in and shit all over the person, right? You should do this, you should do that, right? You should X, Y, and Z. And the key is to ask another question, to go, that sounds frustrating. What do you think is causing the delays? And the key is we want to layer down to behaviors, right? Again, our job as a coach is not to give feedback on outcomes, like that was great or that sounds terrible. It's let's get down to the behavior, because once they start telling their story and describing the behavior, now I'm getting the information from them and I have the basis that I need to give effective feedback that is at the behavioral level as opposed to the outcome level. So that's one of the tools that I like the best. And that works for both reinforcing and corrective feedback. I can also ask, where have you had success this week, right? What do you want feedback on? What's been most exciting for you this week? And again, not to beat a dead horse, but if they go, hey, I made great progress with a client, resist the urge to go, awesome, way to go, that's great. And go, well, what did you do? And then when they tell you what they did, that's what I'm reinforcing, right? That's the behavior that I'm reinforcing.
Fantastic. Thank you for putting that so clearly. That's amazing. Here's a question. How do we coach people in 2020 who work remotely, the value of having web cameras turned on in order to help coach effectively and improve performance?
So I think there's a broad question. How do we coach people in 2020 remotely? And hopefully you got a couple of ideas on that one over the last 50 minutes. In particular, the answer I just gave, I think getting into the discipline of asking effective questions on a regular basis, one thing. Number two, I'm a big believer in this notion of 30 seconds for every player every day, which is a concept I stole from Coach Roy Rana. And I think when people are remote, they feel the absence of their leader much more acutely than when physically present. And so I always want to be keeping tabs on, does every person have three fundamental pieces of information, right? What's my job? How am I doing at my job? Does anybody care about me and my job? And I want to be keeping kind of mental tabs on, has somebody gone too long without an answer to those three questions? And am I getting into that rhythm of, kind of 30, it doesn't have to be really 30 seconds for every player every day, but the general idea of regular connection points. And yeah, to your point about webcams, because so much of communication is nonverbal, I do think the relationship is served well through using Zoom and other technologies. I also fall into the camp of, there is a certain amount of Zoom that is too much Zoom, and giving everybody a little bit of a break so we don't have to look semi-presentable all the time, I think can also go a long way. We want people to be comfortable. So yeah, that balance of, a visual and other, I think is useful.
Right. Very good advice. I'm going to wrap the next two questions into one because they're very similar. So basically, Lori asks, how do you coach someone who's disinterested in a particular aspect of their role, but that's vital to what they have to do? And someone else who writes, how to respond when a team member refuses to accept feedback or disagrees with the feedback. So I guess in both cases, maybe a challenging person who may not be as open to coaching as you might like.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this question at two levels. One is, how do I deal with the situation once it presents itself? And the other is, how do I decide where and with whom I'm spending my time coaching? So when somebody disagrees or refuses to accept feedback, not to come at the person that asked the question, but I think first we have to take a hard look at ourselves, and are we delivering the feedback in a way that is likely to lead to them being open and reflective, or defensive and resistant. And I think we set ourselves up as coaches for resistance a lot. We word feedback in a way that makes us feel really good to say it, and we do it in the guise of being direct. We want to do the hard work as a coach to, rip out any trigger words like always or never that are going to force people to think about that one time they did it or they didn't do it. Words like, now don't take this the wrong way, which is a really good trigger that you might be wording it the wrong way. Or, I've heard from a lot of other people that, where all of a sudden people are going like, what others? You're not even going to own your feedback. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to do as leaders, and this goes back to the developmental bias of, am I wording my feedback in a way that is giving this person a chance, or are they immediately pushed into defensive justification? Now, at the end of the day, you can word your feedback perfectly, and there are some people that are difficult and are going to push back and are not going to accept your opinions. That to me is when we move to confronting, which is we start to get really clear on the behavior change isn't optional. Here's what's at stake, and we're going to put a plan together to hold ourselves accountable. But the bigger question I want to talk about is also, where and with whom are you spending your time coaching? Because most of us, have a limited supply of time, and we can't coach everybody equally. And we often do get pulled into coaching people who are the problem children or marginal performers. And what the research would tell us is that actually the biggest bang for our coaching buck tends to be with the people who get the least coaching, which are the workhorses, the people who just do their job well day in and day out. They're not stars, but they're, solid performers. And so for the folks that you're identifying, I might go, okay, is this a good investment of my coaching time? Or is this more of an HR thing? Like, here are the job requirements, and I'm going to make sure you meet those requirements, but I'm going to direct my coaching to the people that are more thirsty for getting better and moving forward. So hopefully that gives you a couple of ideas. That's a tricky one though, for sure.
Yeah, totally. That's great advice though. Sort of similar, not really, but Shannon asks, I'm someone who loves to become friends with my coworkers, but as a coach, I need to keep friendship out of the equation. How do I establish a strong relationship without confusing friendship with good coaching?
Yeah, and listen, I think this is the thing that a lot of leaders struggle with, especially if they've been promoted out of a cohort and all of a sudden, they're managing people that they used to have more of a lateral relationship with, and you have a naturally friendly personality. The thing that I always think about with a coaching relationship is that a coaching relationship is really about rapport and respect. Right? Can I have a conversation with this person that is not full of awkward pauses? It's like a natural conversation. And do we know that we respect each other? And I think the things that do that are the things that demonstrate caring. They tend to be spending time with the person, giving people my uninterrupted attention, making it easy for people to tell me they disagree with me, being honest and forthright with my own opinions, right? So I think we can communicate respect and build rapport in a way that, helps serve us really well from a coaching standpoint, but doesn't necessarily cross the line into, now I'm this person's best bud and everybody goes, oh, they're getting special treatment because, they're best friends with the boss. So yeah, I think to me, there is a difference between a coaching relationship and, a best buddies relationship, but they can both be served well by investing time and giving somebody respect and full attention.
Excellent. There are so many questions. This is what always happens. There are none, and then there are tons. I'm just going to quickly ask, Chris asks, how do you open the doors at an organization to encourage a coaching culture? Which I think is interesting in the COVID times. Like, if you haven't necessarily had a coaching ethos and then suddenly you're trying to establish it now when we're all working remotely, how do you do that?
Yeah, phenomenal question. And I'm going to share something we learned again from Andy Higgins, who was such a wise coach. He always talked about how with athletes, you have to debrief every performance. And if you only debrief the bad performances, people come to associate coaching as like error correction. You got to debrief the good performances to be in a position to debrief the bad performances. And I think if you're just setting up a coaching culture, in order to build the relationship with the people that you're going to have to coach, they need to know that you see the strengths that they're bringing to the table first, before they are going to be open to your corrections and maybe the tougher conversations. So I would really start by strengthening the connection and really reinforcing the good stuff. Like, I really appreciate the way you ran that meeting. It was really productive. Can you share that slide deck with the rest of the team? Right? Really leveraging and uniquely identifying the specific strengths that they bring to the team. And once you've done that for a little bit of a period of time, now you're probably going to have a lot more success debriefing some of the more challenging conversations or more of your corrective feedback.
Okay, excellent. Gosh, there are so many more questions. I would love to be able to run through them, but we've got a minute till this thing wraps, and I need to do my sales pitch, which I do. Those of you who've been watching these before know that this is the time I let you know about other online learning opportunities at the Smith School of Business. Somebody did ask a question about how do I get additional training. So if you want to become an even better coach or leader, Queen's Executive Education has a bunch of programs, some of which might be just the right thing you're looking for. We've got the Queen's Leadership programs coaching high performance, maintaining motivation through the pandemic. So these are all different kinds of programs, but they're all offered online in a remote format. Queen's Leadership Program is a 4.5-day program. The other 2 are half-day online modules, so there'll be something for everyone here. Visit smithqueens.com/exec-ed. You'll see the URL on your screen right now for more information for anybody interested. And Dane, you're doing some training with Queen's Executive Education, are you not?
Yeah. So a lot of the half-day online sessions, we just did a coaching remotely session 2 weeks ago. I know there's another one coming up in November. Challenging Conversations from a Distance was on Tuesday, half day online. I think there's another one of those in November. And the Maintaining Motivation Through the Pandemic is actually coming up on Monday and again in December, a half day. And that one really gets at, as a coach, how do we stop people from slipping into disillusionment or detachment as this thing, continues to drag on? So yeah, I'm involved in a lot of this stuff and/or our team here at Third Factor as well.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, what an opportunity to get to spend more time learning from you. So thank you.
Awesome.
For everyone else, I hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. It's always a pleasure when Dane speaks to us. Dane, you're such a fantastic, slick presenter. You just are so engaging. It's wonderful. But as I say, next week, we're going to be back in, not next week, in 2 weeks, on Thursday, September 10th, we'll have our next webinar, the title of which will be forthcoming. Stay tuned to your inbox. You'll be getting information about what's coming up soon, and you'll be able to sign up via the link that'll be in that email or at Smith Business Insight on the website. So Dane, as always, thank you for being so wonderful, and thank you everybody for tuning in. You'll all be getting a recording of this conversation in your inbox soon. Stay tuned.
Thanks so much.
From Swiss School of Business, thank you everyone for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.